It was the kind of morning that made your breath linger in the air just a little longer than usual. Washington, D.C. in late November didn't offer much warmth. The sky wore a blanket of dull gray, and the sun, if it had risen at all, was shy and pale behind the clouds. The streets buzzed with the low, steady hum of early city life, engines starting, footsteps echoing off cold cement, muffled chatter between coat collars pulled high. And just outside the towering walls of the federal courthouse on Constitution Avenue sat a woman most people didn't even see. Her name was Lucille Brown, 73 years old, 5'2", maybe 100 pounds, give or take. Less now since she'd been skipping breakfast to save money. Her fingers were bony, her skin paper-thin and etched with time. A faded wool coat hung from her shoulders like a shroud, too big in the arms, the elbows worn to softness. She always wore the same gray knit hat, pulled low over her ears, and a floral apron over her coat, as if it gave her purpose. A battered canvas tote lay beside her chair, stuffed with personal things. A cracked thermos, a photo album wrapped in a grocery bag, a half-eaten sandwich in foil. And beside all that was her business. A makeshift cardboard tray neatly stacked with scratch-off tickets and state lottery slips, clipped with wooden clothespins. Lucille Brown didn't bother anyone. She never called out, never harassed passers-by. She simply sat, nodding politely to the occasional soul who glanced her way. A few knew her as Miss Lucy, though few ever stopped to ask her name. Most days she arrived before sunrise, folding her creaky legs into that rickety folding chair like it was a ritual, and she stayed until the lunch-hour crowd disappeared. To her, the courthouse was a comforting place. Not because it was friendly, but because it was predictable. It was safe, and her son worked inside. No one knew that. Lucille didn't advertise who she was, or who her family might be. She had her reasons. But on that cold Tuesday morning, everything would change. 3 police officers, all white, all dressed in dark navy patrol gear with thick belts and heavy boots, came walking down the sidewalk. Their pace was slow, deliberate, the kind of walk that wasn't quite a patrol and wasn't quite casual either. Their eyes were sharp, scanning, and when they reached the edge of the federal complex, they stopped. From her corner, Lucille looked up just enough to notice the shadow of one of the officers' paws. She lowered her gaze quickly. The lead officer, young, muscular, clean-shaven, motioned toward her with his chin. "See that?" he muttered. "She's been sitting there all week. That's too close to the security zone." The second cop, older with a hard jaw and stiff neck, squinted. Could be casing the building. Might be hiding a camera. The third, barely out of his 20s, didn't say much. He just adjusted the grip on his baton and followed. They didn't call out a greeting. They didn't ask questions. They approached the woman like she was a threat. And Lucille, without even turning, must have felt the shift in the air. The weight of 3 men moving toward her with purpose. She pulled her coat tighter. Her fingers trembled. "Ma'am," the first officer said, not kindly. "What are you doing here?" Lucille looked up slowly. Her eyes were soft, watery, rimmed with red. "Selling lottery tickets, sir. Just here a few hours a day. Been doing it a long time." "This is federal property," the older cop snapped. "You got a permit for this?" She reached slowly for her tote. "No, sir. Just trying to make a little extra. My son works inside. We didn't ask about your son. And then it happened." The younger cop stepped forward and, with one swift kick, sent the cardboard tray of tickets flying. The scratch-offs scattered like confetti, dancing in the cold wind, some landing in the slush-filled curb. Lucille gasped, trying to stand. The second officer grabbed her tote and yanked it from her hand, letting it fall to the ground with a thud. The third officer stepped forward and lifted his baton slightly, pointing it toward her chest. "Papers. ID. Now." Lucille's breath caught in her throat. Her whole body quivered. "Please. This is all I have." She clutched her chest with one hand and held up her other, trembling fingers spread, as if surrendering might calm the storm. Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm not hurting anyone. I'm just waiting for my boy. He's in that building right now." A pause. Silence. Even the street seemed to hush for a second. The lead cop sneered. Yeah? Doing what? Pushing papers? Janitor. Lucille looked up, her eyes no longer pleading, just tired. He's a judge. That made them laugh. A low, cruel chuckle. A judge! The second officer echoed mockingly. Sure he is. Behind them, the sidewalk had begun to fill. Passers-by had slowed. Some were filming. One woman in a red coat whispered, "Is she okay?" Another man took out his phone. Lucille tried again to stand. Her knees buckled. She dropped to the sidewalk, one hand splayed against the concrete, the other clutching her scarf. And just then, from the tall double doors of the courthouse, a group of people emerged. Lawyers, clerks, suits and coats, talking, laughing. Among them, a tall black man in a dark three-piece suit. Mid-40s, commanding presence, trimmed beard, eyes sharp. He spotted the commotion. Then he saw her. The tote, the hat, the scarf. The woman curled on the pavement. His voice rang out like thunder. "Mama!" Everything stopped. The officers turned. The man pushed through the crowd, his long strides cutting through the sea of navy suits and winter coats. What the hell is going on here? The young cop stepped forward. "Sir, please." "Don't sir me," he snapped. "That's my mother." Lucille looked up, her lip trembling. "Darren." The officer stepped back. The tall man dropped to his knees beside her. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" She nodded slightly and he turned, fire in his eyes, toward the officers. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he asked coldly. "That's Lucille Brown, and I'm Justice Darren M. Brown. You've just assaulted the mother of a Supreme Court Justice of the United States of America." Silence. You could hear the wind whistling between the courthouse columns. The crowd had grown. Phones were out. Eyes were wide. One of the officers stammered, We thought she might have been a security concern. Because she's old? Because she's black? Because she's poor?" Darren's voice shook with rage. "She's been sitting there for months, not hurting anyone. And you treat her like a criminal?" Lucille touched his arm gently. "Don't make a scene, baby." He turned back to her. "Mama, this is a scene. You didn't ask for it, but they made it one." Across the street, traffic had slowed. Horns honked in the distance. More people had gathered. A reporter from Channel 9 News pushed forward with a mic. The story had just begun. And somewhere, in the quiet space between outrage and heartbreak, the world tilted just slightly. The woman they all ignored had become the most visible soul on the block. The footage spread like wildfire. By noon, it was already trending on social media. A grainy, vertical video, taken by a teenager across the street, showed 3 white officers surrounding an elderly black woman sitting beside a makeshift lottery stand. The audio crackled, but the cruelty came through clear. The sound of paper scattering in the wind, a thud of something hitting the ground, and a soft, trembling voice trying to speak through fear. Then came the voice, deep, commanding, "Mama!" The last 15 seconds were what everyone replayed. The sudden shift, from law enforcement dominance to paralyzing silence, when the man in the suit stepped forward and declared not just his identity, but hers. "My mother. A Supreme Court Justice's mother." It was the kind of sentence that reverberated beyond the courthouse steps. By 3 p.m., national outlets had picked it up. By nightfall, news vans had parked along Constitution Avenue. And by morning, Lucille Brown had gone from invisible to unforgettable. But let's rewind. Just after the moment of reckoning, while crowds gathered and the officers fumbled with their radios, Darren Brown helped his mother up from the sidewalk. He didn't ask for an ambulance. He didn't wait for apologies. He wrapped her coat tighter, took her tote, and placed one protective arm around her narrow shoulders. "We're going inside," he told the stunned officers. "If you have questions, call my office." The tone in his voice wasn't rage anymore. It was steel. They passed the courthouse guards, who by then had been alerted by comms but said nothing. Inside, the marble floor gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Clerks stood frozen at their desks. Two attorneys in the lobby exchanged looks. Realizing who she was, Darren led her to his chambers. It was quiet there, warm, soft-lit, lined with books and framed degrees on the walls. But Lucille didn't look at any of them. She sank into the leather chair across from his desk and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all her life. He poured her tea from a staff kettle and knelt beside her, watching her face. Her cheek had a faint bruise. There was gravel in the cuff of her pants. "I didn't want this," she whispered, holding the teacup with both hands. "I just wanted to make a little money. Sit near where you work. That's all." "You don't need to sell anything, Mama," he said softly. "You've got a house. You've got my help." She shook her head. "No, baby. You've got your world. I've got mine. I never wanted to get in the way." He sighed, leaning back, running a hand across his jaw. "You've never been in the way." But Lucille didn't answer. Her eyes stared past the bookshelves, beyond the windows, back out to the place where she'd been humiliated only minutes earlier. "I sat there every morning," she said finally. "People walked by. Some said hello. Most didn't. I didn't care. I liked being near you, even if you didn't see me. But today," her voice broke. He moved beside her again, clasping her hands. "Today was wrong, and it's not going to disappear. I don't want to make it worse for you," she added. "You didn't do anything wrong. But they'll say I was loitering, or trespassing. They'll twist it." "Let them try," Darren said, standing. "This isn't about trespassing. This is about dignity. And it's time someone finally tells your story." He walked to his office door, spoke to his clerk, and within 10 minutes, a press statement was drafted. But Lucille Brown didn't want a press statement. She wanted peace. That night, the mayor called. So did the attorney general. So did 2 senators. And then the chief justice. Darren took the calls one by one. They all said the same thing. "This is bad. This is embarrassing. This will blow over, but we must get ahead of it." But Darren Brown didn't want it to blow over. He wanted it to be felt. At 8 p.m., standing on the courthouse steps with Lucille beside him, he faced the press. "My mother has done nothing wrong. She's not a security threat. She's not invisible. She's a citizen of this country, and today she was publicly humiliated by the very people sworn to protect her. And let me say this clearly. This isn't just about one incident. This is about what happens every day in this city, in this country, when assumptions replace humanity. When uniforms excuse cruelty. When old black women are treated like ghosts." He turned to Lucille, took her hand, and said quietly, "And she deserves to be seen." It was a short speech, but the silence that followed was longer than any applause could have been. The next morning, Lucille didn't leave the house. Her phone rang constantly. Neighbors knocked at the door. A bakery down the street delivered a box of muffins with a card signed by the morning commuters. Her face was now on TV. A still frame from the video, her trembling hand held up in surrender, the baton pointed at her chest, had become the new symbol of excessive policing. She didn't ask for it, but symbols rarely do. Darren stopped by in the afternoon, bringing groceries, flowers, and a bottle of liniment oil for her sore knee. He made her sit and rest while he checked the mailbox. Inside were letters, dozens, some handwritten, some typed, some with childlike drawings. One said, "Dear Miss Brown, I saw the video. My Nana sells fruit on the corner and people yell at her too. I hope you're okay." Another simply said, "You are not alone." Lucille didn't cry when she read them. She wept silently when she saw one from a man in Georgia, handwritten in cursive. "My mother used to sit like you. They took her in '89. I never got the chance to defend her. But watching your son stand up for you made me feel like someone finally did." The police department issued a formal apology on Thursday. The mayor called it a deeply regrettable misunderstanding. The department called it an unfortunate lapse in protocol. But no one called it what it really was: profiling, fear, disrespect. When asked if the officers would be suspended, the chief of police gave a lukewarm statement about ongoing review procedures. Darren Brown didn't wait. He filed an official complaint. He called for a formal investigation. And then he did something few justices ever do. He agreed to be interviewed on live television. On Sunday night, the nation tuned in. CNN, 60 Minutes. Every outlet ran clips from the special. Lucille sat beside Darren on a wide, beige couch in a softly lit studio. The interviewer, a woman in her 40s with a calm voice and kind eyes, asked gently, "Miss Brown, did you ever expect your life would be seen by millions this way?" Lucille shook her head. "No, baby. I thought I was invisible. I thought I'd live and pass like most women like me, quietly. But I guess God had other plans." The interviewer smiled, leaned in. "And how do you feel now?" Lucille took a long pause. "Grateful," she said, her voice steady. "But not for the fame, not for the attention, for the fact that maybe now someone else's mama won't be treated the way I was." Darren squeezed her hand. And America, watching from couches and bedrooms and phones, felt something shift. Back in D.C., the officers involved were placed on administrative leave. A review board was formed. The city council proposed a new initiative requiring anti-bias training for all law enforcement personnel. But none of that could undo what had already happened. Couldn't erase the memory of Lucille falling backward, of the tickets in the wind, of the look on her face when she whispered, "I just sell lottery." Those images had become permanent. But so had something else. The sight of a black mother, long ignored, standing beside her son. Not as a footnote, but as a headline. That week, the courthouse plaza saw something unusual. People began showing up, not to protest, but to sit. Elderly women, vendors, retirees. Some came with folding chairs and tea flasks. Others held signs that read, "I am Lucille." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was visible. Lucille watched from her window the first morning it happened. She didn't go out. She just smiled. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Lucille Brown hadn't been back to the courthouse in nearly a week. She'd been inside, sure, first in Darren's chambers, later invited to a private lunch with 3 federal judges and the Deputy Attorney General. She'd sat at a long mahogany table where someone pulled out her chair and refilled her tea without her having to ask. They all addressed her as Mrs. Brown, with the same kind of reverence one might use for a witness to history. But Lucille didn't want the headlines, or the photo ops. She didn't even like the way people stared at her now. Not with suspicion like before, but with a kind of awe that made her feel like a stranger in her own skin. She wanted her bench back, her corner, her morning ritual, her peace. But she knew the moment she returned to that spot on Constitution Avenue, it wouldn't be the same. Nothing ever is once the world knows your name. "I just miss my routine," she said to Darren as they sat in her kitchen on the 6th morning. "My little spot, my quiet mornings, that wind." "It's cold," Darren replied gently. "You don't need to be out there." Lucille gave him a sideways glance. "That's not the point, baby." He sighed, resting his elbows on the kitchen table. I don't want anything else to happen." "You think I do?" she asked, arching a brow. They sat in silence for a while. Outside the window, a cardinal darted through the skeletal branches of a birch tree. The wind whispered along the eaves. Lucille reached for her tea. "Darren," she said softly, "I need to go back. Just once. Just to feel normal again." Darren leaned back, watching her carefully. He knew that look in her eyes. It was the same one she had when he was 12 and wanted to drop out of piano lessons. She didn't yell. She didn't force. She just looked at him like she believed he was capable of something more. Now that look was reversed, and he understood. "Okay," he said after a pause. "But I'm going with you." They arrived just before 8. Lucille wore her same gray hat and wool coat, though Darren had insisted she layer thermals underneath. She carried her tote bag, freshly dusted off, and a new batch of lottery tickets she'd bought herself the day before, with the help of her neighbor, Miss Vonda. Darren parked the car 2 blocks away. When they turned the corner onto Constitution Avenue, Lucille stopped short. They were already there. Dozens of people, some old, some young, some holding signs, were sitting quietly in a loose semicircle around the bench where Lucille used to sit. One woman had brought a thermos and was pouring tea into paper cups. A teenage boy was handing out bagels. A pair of musicians, one on a cello, the other on violin, played a soft instrumental near the courthouse steps. At the center of it all, on Lucille's bench, was a small handmade sign. "Reserved for Miss Brown." Lucille stood frozen. Darren looked at her. "You okay?" She didn't answer. She just walked forward slowly, each step hesitant, until she reached the edge of the gathering. People noticed. One by one, they stood. A man removed his hat. A young woman with a baby on her hips stepped aside. Lucille approached the bench, stared down at it, and then turned to the group. "You don't have to stand," she said softly. "Please. Sit. This isn't about me. This is about all of us." Someone clapped. Then another. The applause spread like a ripple, not thunderous, but warm. Respectful. Lucille sat down. The violinist shifted songs. The cello followed. It sounded like memory. That night, Darren was invited to speak at Georgetown University. The lecture hall was packed, students, professors, community leaders. The topic had been scheduled months ago, justice, race, and visibility in the American legal system. But now it had a new, unavoidable context. He walked to the podium without notes. "My mother didn't ask for cameras. She didn't ask to be a symbol. She didn't even ask for justice," he began. "She just wanted to be seen." The room was silent. And that, to me, is what justice is. Not just laws. Not just verdicts. Visibility. Dignity. The acknowledgement that someone's life matters, not because of titles or credentials, but because they're human. He paused, scanning the room. "My mother sat on that sidewalk every morning for years. She saw senators, attorneys, judges, including me, walk right past her. And the truth is, I never told anyone who she was. Not because I was ashamed, but because I thought, somehow, it didn't matter." He looked down. I was wrong. Back at Lucille's home, the doorbell rang after midnight. Darren opened it to find a woman standing there in the cold. Late 30s. Curly hair pulled into a bun. Her hands trembled as she held out a small brown envelope. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. "But I saw the video. I saw your mama. And I need help." Her name was Alicia Harris. Her mother, Claudette, had been arrested a month prior after a traffic stop in Virginia. No drugs. No weapons. No warrants. But she'd refused to get out of the car until her daughter arrived. The dashcam footage showed her being dragged out anyway, screaming, handcuffed, her head striking the pavement. 3 days later, she was dead. "No one's listening," Alicia said, eyes rimmed red. "They say she had a seizure. That it wasn't their fault. But I know something's wrong. I can't get any answers." Darren looked at the envelope. Inside were photos, medical reports, a copy of the arrest record, and a folded note from Claudette written 2 days before her death. "They don't see me," it said. "Not really." Darren closed the envelope. He didn't say anything at first. Then he looked over his shoulder where Lucille was standing silently in her robe, watching from the hallway. "Come in," Darren said softly. "Let's talk." The next week, a new video surfaced. Not from a courthouse. From a jail cell. Claudette Harris, restrained, calling for water. Her voice weak. Guards passing without stopping. Time-stamped footage. Clear neglect. The story hit the media fast. But this time, it wasn't treated as a one-off incident. It was linked, by anchors, by headlines, by activists, to Lucille Brown. To a pattern. To a reckoning. Lucille watched it all from her armchair. She didn't seek the spotlight. She didn't go to rallies. But she answered letters. Hundreds of them. She wrote back in loops and curls, sometimes with shaky handwriting, sometimes with short phrases. She told women to keep speaking. She told daughters to keep fighting. And every morning, she opened her blinds, poured her tea, and sat. She didn't go back to the bench anymore. She didn't have to. Because now people saw her everywhere. And more importantly, they saw themselves. The house on T Street had never been quiet like this. Lucille Brown sat in her kitchen, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. The steam from the tea curled toward the ceiling, caught in a golden beam of morning sun. Outside, someone was mowing grass. Across the alley, a dog barked twice and stopped. But inside, silence. It wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind that comes after noise, after headlines, after camera crews, after people asking over and over, "How did you feel when they did that to you?" As if pain had to be translated into words to be understood. Lucille had said what she needed to say. She'd sat in interviews, shook hands, even let a documentary crew into her living room for an afternoon. But now the rush had passed. The calls had slowed, and quiet had returned. Still, nothing was normal. There were still letters. Dozens. From all over the country. There were flowers at her doorstep on Tuesdays. Homemade pies from strangers. A woman in Maryland mailed her a handmade quilt with her name sewn in block letters at the bottom. Lucille, we see you. But there was something deeper happening too. A shift. She felt it every time she looked into the mirror and saw not just her own reflection but the weight of every invisible woman she had ever known. The ones who cleaned houses and wiped counters and sold candy bars in parking lots. The ones who rocked babies in bus terminals and held open doors without thanks. The ones no one ever stopped to ask, "Are you okay?" Lucille wasn't afraid of attention. She was afraid of what would happen once the attention moved on. One afternoon, 2 weeks after Alicia Harris came to their doorstep, Lucille went to the courthouse not to sit outside but to meet Darren inside. It was raining. She wore her navy raincoat and pulled the hood low over her silver hair. Her cane clicked softly on the marble as she passed through security where the guard, now familiar, nodded at her with a respectful, "Good morning, Miss Brown." She smiled, though her lips didn't quite lift. Darren was in a meeting when she arrived. She waited in his chambers, sipping warm water, staring out the tall window that overlooked the plaza. The bench where she used to sit was gone. In its place was a new permanent fixture, a public seat inscribed with the words, "Justice begins where dignity is recognized. L. Brown." She hadn't approved that. She hadn't even known it was being made. When Darren entered the room, his face was tired. He tossed a folder onto his desk and sat in the chair across from her. "They're not letting it go," he said. "Alicia's case?" she asked. He nodded. "The Justice Department is dragging its feet. Virginia's department refuses to release full body cam footage. And now they're leaking stories to the press, trying to paint Claudette as unstable." Lucille sighed. "Same song, new verse." He looked up. "What do we do?" She took a long pause before answering. "Keep telling the truth." That evening, Darren appeared on the readout with Joy Reid. He came prepared, legal notes, policy data, precedent cases. But when the conversation shifted to Claudette Harris, Joy asked him something unexpected. "Where did your fire come from, Justice Brown?" Darren blinked. "Excuse me. The part of you that doesn't let this go. That keeps pushing. That doesn't just interpret the law but challenges the silence in it. Where did that come from?" He looked down for a long moment. Then he smiled. "My mother," he said. "She taught me that quiet doesn't mean passive. That dignity isn't loud, but it's powerful. That the people we walk past without noticing, they carry the whole weight of this country. And if we can't protect them, then all of this," he gestured around the studio, "means nothing." Joy leaned in. "And do you think she knows how powerful she is now?" Darren chuckled. "She's known. It's the rest of us who are just catching up." Meanwhile, Lucille was sitting at home, folding laundry. She didn't have cable. She didn't need to see the interview to know what her son had said. She could feel it in her bones. What she didn't expect was the knock at the door. It was nearly 9 p.m. She opened it to find a girl. Maybe 14. Hispanic. Soaked from the rain, holding a plastic bag with a single letter inside. "I'm sorry," the girl said, out of breath. "I don't mean to bother you. My mom, she said I had to bring this myself." Lucille blinked. "You walked here." "We took the bus. She's waiting at the corner." Lucille took the bag and opened it. Inside was a note, written in blue pen on lined notebook paper. "Miss Brown. My name is Julia Ortega. I was arrested last year for selling candy bars in front of the metro. I was 13. They put me in a room with no window for 6 hours. They never called my mother. A policewoman told me I could be charged with fraud because I didn't have a vendor permit. I didn't even know what that meant. When I saw what happened to you, I cried. Not just for you. For me. For my mom. For my grandmother. Thank you. You made us feel seen." Lucille wiped her eyes and stepped forward, pulling the girl into a gentle hug. "You are seen, baby," she whispered. "You are." Word spread. Not from press releases or breaking news, but from whispers. From stories passed in barbershops and nail salons. From church bulletins and late-night texts. From mothers to daughters to sons. Lucille Brown had become something more than a name. She was a mirror, a lighthouse, a quiet rebellion. That winter, a hearing was held in Virginia regarding the Claudette Harris case. Darren attended in person, though he wasn't required to. Lucille went with him. She sat beside Alicia in the second row, hands clasped, eyes focused. The courtroom was crowded. Media was banned, but inside, it was thick with tension. The prosecution spoke first. The defense followed. And then Alicia was called. Her voice was clear. Not angry, just resolute. My mother didn't die because of a seizure. She died because people didn't care if she lived. And from the back of the courtroom, Lucille's eyes filled with tears. Not from grief, from recognition. Outside, the press swarmed. Darren made no statements. But that night, the video of Alicia's testimony, leaked by a clerk, circulated faster than anything before it. And alongside it came another clip. From 5 years ago, a different woman, a different city, same pattern. A woman on a bus, arrested for eating a sandwich. Another dragged from a waiting room for loitering. Each story was separate, but now they began to weave together. A mosaic, a movement, and at the center always, Lucille. That spring, Darren returned home late one evening. He found his mother sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through a stack of envelopes. "Any good news?" he asked. Lucille held up one letter. "This one's from a police officer," she said. "Says he used to think the world was black and white. Rules and rules. But after seeing me, he started asking why those rules only seemed to crush some people." Darren smiled. "That's good." Lucille nodded. "And this one," she added, holding up another, "is from a woman in Wisconsin. Her son's autistic. Got tackled at a library. She thought no one would believe her. But now she's filing charges." She paused, looking at her son. "You think this ends with me?" she asked. Darren shook his head. "I think it begins with you." That night, Lucille sat on her porch. The wind was warmer now. The dog across the alley barked again, and she laughed. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if the world would really change. But she knew she'd left her corner of it better than she found it. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Rain came back to Washington in early April. The kind that didn't pour but whispered, soft sheets falling on rooftops and window panes, murmuring across parked cars and puddled sidewalks. Lucille Brown listened from her favorite chair by the front window, wrapped in a knitted shawl that Miss Vonda next door had made. Her tea had long gone cold on the table beside her, but she didn't reach for it. Her thoughts were elsewhere. She had a decision to make. One that had crept slowly toward her, disguised as letters, invitations, and phone calls. One that had been suggested, gently at first, then with urgency, by Darren, by journalists, even by strangers on the street. They wanted her to speak, not just at hearings or panels, but formally, to take a stage, to give a speech. She doesn't want to be famous, Darren had told a conference organizer. She wants to be left in peace. But it wasn't about fame anymore. Not really. A week ago, an envelope had arrived. Inside was a formal letter from the University of Pennsylvania, inviting Lucille Brown to deliver the commencement address at the School of Law's graduation ceremony. The dean had written the letter by hand, and enclosed were 123 signatures from graduating students who had all written the same 3 words under their names. "We see you." Lucille held the letter now in her lap. Her fingers trembled, not from age but from something deeper, doubt. What if she froze? What if her voice cracked? What if she wasn't enough? Then she remembered something. Years ago, when Darren was in 3rd grade, he had stood up on a makeshift stage in the school auditorium to recite the Langston Hughes poem Mother to Son. Lucille had watched from the crowd. He'd been nervous, small, fidgety, forgetting lines. But at the last stanza, when he raised his voice and said, "Life for me ain't been no crystal stair," she'd stood up and clapped before anyone else. She had believed in his voice. Now it was time to believe in her own. The graduation hall was packed. 2,000 guests, folding chairs in perfect rows, robes swaying with pride, the American flag to the left of the stage, the university seal behind it, and in front, one simple wooden podium with a microphone. Darren sat in the 2nd row. Lucille's name was announced, and when she stepped onto the stage, the audience stood. All of them. She didn't rush. She walked slowly, deliberately, with her cane tapping rhythmically beneath her. She reached the podium and paused. Then she spoke. "Good morning," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I don't have degrees like yours. I don't have a law office. I don't know how to cite articles or write legal briefs. I can't tell you the name of every judge on the circuit. But I know what fairness looks like. And more importantly, I know what it looks like when it's missing. The room was silent. When I was a child, she continued, I watched my daddy get pushed off a sidewalk because a white man wanted to pass. I was 6 years old. I watched the same thing happen to my brother in Alabama when I was 23. He was arrested for obstructing traffic. He'd been standing still. She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. Decades later, I sat on a sidewalk in Washington, D.C., selling scratch-offs, not bothering anyone, and 3 officers thought I was dangerous. They didn't ask for my name. They didn't ask if I needed help. They assumed. Because to them, an old black woman sitting quietly was suspicious. Murmurs moved through the crowd like wind. Lucille nodded gently. My son stood up for me, and the world took notice. But I want to tell you something today that's even more important. She leaned forward. There are millions of people who don't have a son in a high place. They don't have a camera nearby. They don't have a viral moment. They only have you. You, sitting here in these robes, with your shiny new degrees and your future ahead of you. You will be the person who walks into a courtroom and sees someone that the world has stopped seeing. You'll be the one who gets to decide if their voice matters. And when that day comes, I hope you remember that justice doesn't begin in the courtroom. It begins in the heart. A long silence followed. Then applause. But it wasn't the kind that bursts loud and wild. It started with a single clap, then another, building slowly until the room thundered. Lucille stepped back. She didn't bow. She just nodded and smiled. After the ceremony, a line formed, graduates, families, faculty, each waiting to shake her hand or give her a hug. Some cried. One student, a tall white man with tattoos and tears in his eyes, whispered, My mother was like you. She died before she got to see this. Lucille embraced him. You carry her, she said. She sees you. Back home, the house was quiet again. But this time, Lucille felt full. She sat in her armchair, pulled a blanket over her knees, and closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she dreamed. Not of officers or courtrooms, but of a park bench, a gentle breeze, and someone saying, Good morning, Miss Brown, as they passed. Meanwhile, in the country beyond her porch, the wave kept rising. Cities renamed public benches after her. A school in Detroit launched the Lucille Brown Scholarship for Civil Visibility. Alicia Harris began working with a legal advocacy center and gave a TEDx talk titled, My Mother, Their Silence, and the Power of One Voice. The term Lucille moment began circulating online, a way to describe any moment where a person stood up for dignity, even when no one else did. And Darren? He kept judging, quietly, fairly, but with new weight in his words. He told a colleague, My bench used to be a symbol of authority. Now it's a reminder of where she sat and what it cost. Then came the call from the White House. They wanted to honor Lucille at the Medal of Freedom ceremony. Darren told her first. She laughed, shaking her head. I'm just a lady with a tote bag and some tea. He smiled. You're the lady who made the country listen. She didn't say yes right away, but when she did, she only had one request. No red carpet, and no heels. The morning of the ceremony was warm, rare for early May in Washington. Lucille Brown sat in front of her bedroom mirror, quietly buttoning the soft lavender blouse she had saved for years but never worn. Miss Vonda had ironed it the night before, pressing each seam like she was preparing a royal garment. A silver brooch, a gift from a stranger in Alabama, was pinned just above her heart. Her gray wool hat, freshly brushed, sat neatly on the dresser. She didn't wear it today. Not for the White House, she whispered to herself, brushing the last wisps of silver hair into place. Let them see all of me. Outside, Darren waited with the car. He wore a dark navy suit with a matching tie, but as always, his eyes softened when he looked at her. You ready? He asked. She paused on the front steps. I'm not sure anyone ever is. The White House South Lawn was vibrant with sunlight and sound. Rows of folding chairs spread across the grass like ripples on a pond. Journalists and dignitaries mingled along the perimeter. To the left, the United States Marine Band rehearsed under a striped awning, while a photographer stood near a podium, adjusting exposure levels. Lucille was ushered quietly to her seat near the front. Darren sat beside her, his hand never far from hers. To her right sat a Nobel laureate. To her left, a retired senator. Beyond them, secretaries, scientists, artists, and veterans. Then the voice rang out across the loudspeakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States." The audience rose, and when the President, a woman in a crisp blue suit, took the stage, her first words were, "Today, we recognize citizens who have shaped the moral conscience of our nation. Not with fame, but with courage. Not from the center of power, but from its edges." She spoke about civil rights, about courage, about the quiet revolutions that happen on sidewalks. Then she said her name, Lucille Brown. Gasps rippled across the lawn. Everyone knew who she was, but few expected her to be first. Lucille stood slowly, Darren rising with her. The President met her halfway. "I've waited a long time to shake your hand," she said, and then added quietly, "My mother was a lunch lady. She used to sit like you." Lucille nodded. "Then she understands." The medal was placed gently around her neck. The crowd stood. No cameras clicked. For a moment the world was still. After the ceremony, Lucille didn't attend the reception. Instead, she asked Darren to take her to a different corner of D.C. They pulled up outside a gray building, nondescript, slightly run down, with a flickering overhead light. "This used to be a diner," Lucille said. "I worked here when you were 8. I never told you that." Darren raised an eyebrow. "No, you didn't. I cleaned floors before dawn. Saved every dime to buy your first suit." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and realized there were still whole chapters of her life he'd never read. She turned to him. "Now you're a judge," she said, "and they gave me a medal. But none of that changes the truth." "What's the truth, Mama?" "That we were always enough. Even when no one looked. Even when they kicked over our tray." She looked back at the diner. "I just needed them to know it." A week later, Lucille returned to her bench, her real one. Not the marble monument, but a small wooden bench on the corner near the church where she used to volunteer. She sat with her tote bag, now filled not with lottery tickets, but with blank cards and pens. Whenever someone sat beside her, she gave them a card and asked one question. "Who are you when no one's watching?" Some answered, some didn't, some cried. She wrote down each name, each story, and tucked it into a small notebook she titled The Scene. Meanwhile, Darren received a letter. It was from a judge in Georgia, a white man in his 60s. It read, "I used to think justice was neutral, that it existed above feelings, above identity. But now I understand. Justice starts the moment you stop pretending not to see. Your mother taught me that." Darren folded the letter and placed it inside a drawer labeled personal. Then he called Lucille. "I just got a letter from a man who used to sentence kids without looking them in the eye. He says he sees now." Lucille chuckled. "Well," she said, "then it was worth sitting in the cold all those years." Later that summer, Lucille was invited to speak at a National Police Training Academy. She declined. Instead, she wrote a letter. "Dear officers, I am not here to train you. I am here to remind you that behind every face you see on the street is a story. And sometimes that story is quieter than your radio. But it matters more. You can write tickets. You can carry weapons. But the most powerful thing you carry is your judgment. Use it carefully. L. Brown." They read it aloud at the Academy's graduation. Some rolled their eyes. Some went home and cried. Years passed. Lucille stayed in her home on T Street, tending to her garden, feeding birds, and writing back to strangers who still sent her notes. She rarely talked about the incident anymore. She didn't need to. The world remembered for her. A mural was painted across the side of the courthouse. Lucille's hands holding a paper ticket, the Capitol behind her, and a caption that read, The most powerful story is the one no one bothered to ask. Tourists took photos there. Young lawyers took vows beneath it. And every year, on the date of the incident, someone, no one knows who, left a fresh cup of tea and a single lottery ticket at the base of the wall. In her final years, Lucille kept one item by her bed. The original tote bag, torn at the edges, faded canvas. Inside she kept three things: the brooch she wore at the White House, Darren's third-grade poem, and a ticket stub from the day she sat on that cold sidewalk and told 3 officers, "My son works in that building." When Lucille Brown passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 90, the nation paused. Her funeral was private, just close friends, neighbors, and family. No cameras, no speeches, just soft music, laughter, and Darren reading from the Book of Proverbs. She is clothed with strength and dignity, and she laughs without fear of the future. Later, the president issued a statement. Lucille Brown reminded us that justice is not a courtroom. It is a choice we make each day to see one another fully. And somewhere, on a quiet sidewalk in D.C., a new plaque was added beneath a bench, in honor of Lucille Brown, who sat quietly so we would listen loudly. True justice begins not in the courtroom, but in the way we choose to see each other every day. Lucille Brown was never asking for recognition, only dignity. Her quiet presence exposed a powerful truth, that the most overlooked among us often carry the most important stories. When we finally choose to listen, we begin to heal not just systems, but the soul of a nation. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on who you pass by every day without noticing. Then help us spread Lucille Brown's legacy. Share this video, like it if it touched your heart, and subscribe for more powerful real-life stories that deserve to be heard. Your voice helps us keep these stories alive.